Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
It was a Monday, and I wore the blue shirt. You know the one. The shirt you keep pressed at the back of the closet for what you think might be a good day. A meeting with the board, maybe a project milestone, or just a day when you need to remind yourself you're still a professional. I hadn't worn it in months. I guess part of me thought today might be the day they finally said thank you. Not in words, of course, but maybe a raise or a promotion. Hell, even a lunch on the company card would have meant something. But instead, I was handed a beige envelope. You know the type. The kind HR uses when they want to pretend it's just routine. Clean font, no emotion, and not a single word of thanks. Just the phrase, "We regret to inform you." I was sitting across from Scott Levin, the CFO, with a smile that reminded me of a man watching his dog limp into the vet's office for the last time. Next to him was Rachel from HR, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else, probably sipping her oat milk latte and reformatting job descriptions, not mediating a corporate execution. I looked at both of them, and neither one could meet my eyes. That's the part that really gets you, not the words, the silence around them. Effective immediately, your position has been eliminated as part of a company-wide cost restructuring initiative, Rachel said, reading the line like she'd practiced it all weekend. I turned to Scott, the man who toasted me just 6 days earlier for preventing a $2 million catastrophe, and all he could do was nod, once, shallowly, like he was already late to his next meeting. He didn't thank me. He didn't even lie about it being hard. He just sat there like a guy watching the last 15 minutes of a movie he didn't even like. They gave me 15 minutes to clear out my desk. I still had a coffee in the cup, still warm. My screensaver still showed that photo of my daughter at the beach, the last trip we took before everything started unraveling at home. Sarah had warned me. She saw it coming before I did. "They're phasing you out," she said one night, after I told her they were moving one of my junior devs into a meeting I wasn't invited to. I told her she was overthinking it. I told her I was indispensable. I told her they'd never let go of the one guy who knew where all the landmines were buried. Turns out, I was wrong on all 3 counts. As I packed, I caught Carl, one of the new project managers, bright-eyed and 3 LinkedIn certifications deep, watching me. He had that look, half pity, half calculation. The kind of look people give when they're already measuring how fast they can get your desk once you're gone. I nodded at him. He didn't nod back. You'd think I'd be angry, but I wasn't. Not yet. I was numb, mostly. The kind of numb you get after surgery, where you know something important's been cut out of you, but the nerve endings haven't caught up. I walked past the framed mission statement in the hallway. Empower, innovate, respect. I almost laughed. That thing had hung crooked for 3 years. No one ever fixed it. Just like no one fixed the fact that the last 3 projects I led had been resold internally as team efforts, even though the only team I saw at 2 in the morning was me, a Diet Coke, and a server on fire. I drove home in silence. No radio, no calls, just the tick of the turn signal and the sound of tires on asphalt. Sarah opened the door before I knocked. She knew. I didn't even have to say it. She hugged me, tighter than she had in weeks. That kind of hug that says, "I'm sorry, you still believe people like you get rewarded for doing the right thing." I poured a glass of bourbon and stared at my inbox. Still logged in, still had access. And that's when the numbness started to wear off, and something else took its place. Not rage, not yet, but something colder, heavier. A kind of calculation. I had been loyal. I had been useful. And I had been used, but I wasn't powerless, and I wasn't stupid. So I started thinking about what they didn't know, about what I had built, about what they assumed would just keep running without me. What would you do if your boss shook your hand one day, toasted your success the next, and stabbed you in the back before you could even finish your coffee? Would you let it slide? Or would you leave a parting gift? Because I did leave them something, but not the kind they expected. When people talk about loyalty in the workplace, they usually mean the kind that flows upward, not downward. You're supposed to stick it out, show up early, stay late, hit the deadlines, solve the fires, clean up everyone else's mess, and say thank you when they give you a new mug with the company logo on it during Employee Appreciation Week. That's the kind of loyalty I gave Syntrex for 12 years. Not the transactional kind, the real kind, the stupid kind. The kind that makes you miss your daughter's piano recital because someone on the West Coast couldn't compile a build after lunch. It started with a government contract that was supposed to be a slam dunk. We were integrating a proprietary analytics platform for one of those federal agencies with 3 letters in its name, and it was supposed to go live on the first of the month. It was a flagship project, transformational, they said in the kickoff call, with half the C-suite in attendance and the other half texting on their phones. On paper, it looked like a win, but anyone who's actually written code for government software knows it never goes that smoothly, and sure enough, 2 weeks before the deadline, we discovered that the middleware we were relying on wasn't compatible with the updated security protocols the agency required. Now, here's the part they never mention in the boardroom. When something breaks at that level, no one takes responsibility. Not the sales team who oversold the capabilities, not the architects who were on vacation, not the CTO who took a long weekend in Scottsdale, and definitely not the project manager who was too busy scheduling Zoom huddles to understand the system architecture. It always falls on the guy who knows where the wires cross. That was me. And when the server started throwing errors and the data pipeline began hemorrhaging unencrypted reports, guess who got the call? I spent 72 hours in the office that weekend. I don't mean I worked 72 hours. I mean I lived there. I slept on the floor of the QA room with a jacket rolled under my head, ate energy bars from the vending machine, and peed in the janitor's sink because someone locked the bathroom after hours and facilities had gone home. No one from leadership called. No one brought coffee. No one asked if I needed help. It was just me, a mountain of log files, and a growing sense that if I didn't fix this, we'd be looking at breach reports, penalties, and likely termination of contract. It wasn't just about saving face. This project represented 1/3 of the company's annual revenue, and without it, we were toast. I rebuilt the back end from scratch. I patched the middleware, hand-compiled it, wrote temporary authentication wrappers, faked a pass-through encryption layer that would hold just long enough to satisfy the client's auditors, and deployed it all with 5 minutes to spare before the agency's Monday login. They never knew there had been a problem. They just saw green lights and kept their signatures on the contract. The following week, Scott Levin gave a speech at the All Hands. He stood there in his tailored jacket, holding his little remote like a talk show host, and clicked through a slide deck about resilience in challenging times. He didn't mention me. He didn't mention the near catastrophe. He didn't even mention the fact that his entire job still existed because I had buried the fire before the smoke could reach the lobby. But he did say that, thanks to our team's efforts, we retained a vital government contract, securing our position for Q2. Everyone clapped. I didn't. I was in the server room replacing a failed RAID array. I didn't expect a parade. I didn't even expect a bonus. But I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would say, "Hey man, that was close. You saved our asses." Instead, I got an email about compensation reviews postponed until next quarter, and a calendar invite titled 1-1 Catch-Up Will Lash Scott. The invite was the first signal. The second was that he rescheduled it 3 times, eventually settling on a Thursday afternoon, the professional equivalent of cleaning out the fridge on a Friday. When I walked in, he was polite, too polite. He asked how my daughter was doing, then complimented my shoes. When executives start making small talk about your family or your wardrobe, it's because they're about to do something unpleasant and want to pretend you're still friends. That was the day he told me the company was re-evaluating the distribution of legacy roles to support a more agile structure. I asked what that meant, and he smiled like I'd asked what oxygen was. "It's about aligning value with velocity," he said. I nodded. What I wanted to do was punch the words out of his mouth one by one. Later that night, Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table while she flipped through the grocery budget, and I stared at the company Slack channel still pinging with useless motivational gifs. She asked me if I thought they were phasing me out. I said no. I still believed that performance mattered, that solving the big problems counted for something. I told her that I was too valuable to let go. I didn't know it yet, but by the time that conversation happened, the decision had already been made. They just needed the paperwork to catch up. There's a special kind of humiliation in realizing you gave everything to people who didn't even consider you part of the team. I wasn't just another name on the org chart. I was the guy who built the chart, and then someone else printed it without my name on it. 12 years. Not even a handshake. By the time I began to truly understand the depth of the setup, the damage had already been done. It didn't hit me all at once, like a punch to the face. No, it came slow, creeping, like mold behind drywall, silent and deliberate. What looked like a gradual loss of responsibilities and harmless reassignments turned out to be something far more calculated, far more corrosive, and by the time I noticed, the rot had spread to every corner of my position. The saddest part is that I'd actually believed I was mentoring a new generation of devs, handing off tasks, empowering others. But what I was really doing was digging my own grave in neatly commented lines of code. It started subtle, almost invisible unless you were looking for it, and I wasn't. My access to the primary build environment was suddenly under review for security compliance, so I was handed a test server with temporary credentials that were never upgraded. Meeting invites began to skip my inbox, and when I raised the issue, I was told it must have been a calendar sync glitch. Entire product roadmaps were redrawn without my input, though somehow I was still expected to answer for delays and bugs I had never even seen in the pipeline. It was like watching your house slowly rearrange itself without ever hearing a hammer fall or seeing a single hand move. And then there was Darren. Darren, the new CTO, was the human embodiment of a TED Talk that no one asked for. All buzzwords and no backbone, fresh from some Bay Area startup with a failed IPO and a LinkedIn profile that read like a spreadsheet. He was 35, wore a Patagonia vest in summer, and had this patronizing way of ending every sentence with, "makes sense," like he was doing you a favor by speaking in plain English. He once told me, with a straight face, that code is only as clean as the culture that curates it, which I think was meant to sound smart, but just made me want to delete his user permissions on principle. Darren didn't like legacy anything, not tools, not architecture, and definitely not people. And to him, I was the worst kind of legacy. The guy who actually understood how things worked beneath the surface. I wasn't flashy. I didn't pitch ideas with color-coded slides or send Slack updates at midnight to look busy. I just built systems that didn't break. And that made me dangerous, because I couldn't be controlled the way junior engineers could. So, Darren did what every polished corporate executioner does. He slowly, quietly, made me irrelevant. Now, I wasn't born yesterday. I knew when something smelled off, but it wasn't until I overheard a conversation, not meant for my ears, that everything clicked. I had stayed late one Thursday night, the office mostly empty, and while refilling my coffee in the break room, I caught Darren on the phone just around the corner. He wasn't whispering. The guy never did. And I heard every word. "Yeah, we'll let him finish the Q2 patch rollout, then transition his responsibilities to the new architecture team. He won't push back. He's too proud, too old school. We'll tell him it's part of the Agile transformation plan. Then, by Q3, we sunset the role entirely. He'll get a nice letter." I stood there, holding my mug like an idiot, listening to my own future being erased one buzzword at a time. That was the moment something inside me broke. Not loudly, not with fire, just a quiet snap, like a string that had held too much weight for too long. I went back to my desk and stared at the terminal. And then I started thinking, not just about the betrayal, but about the systems, about what I had built. Because here's the part they never understood, or maybe just never bothered to learn. While they were busy curating culture, I had written the core backend for our flagship product. I wasn't just the architect. I was the ghost in the server. Every data query, every client transaction, every single report that passed through the system touched something I had built with my own hands. I didn't need permissions to know what was happening. I already knew. And more importantly, I knew how to make it stop. So I began to prepare. Not recklessly, not out of spite, but with precision. I started with a simple backup, just the key directories I had personally developed, the proprietary modules that handled everything from session encryption to analytics batching. I copied them to a secure drive, encrypted the whole thing with a passphrase only I could remember, and tucked it away. Not out of malice, not yet, but because it was mine, because I had built it, because I wasn't about to let them erase me from the system and walk away with everything I had given without so much as a credit. Then I made a few changes, quiet ones, nothing that would raise a red flag, nothing that would crash anything. Just a few dependencies shifted here, a couple of obfuscated variables there, a small authentication script that would require manual override after a certain number of system pings, something that wouldn't trigger until weeks later. I didn't even document it, which, frankly, was the most rebellious thing I'd ever done as a programmer. The irony is that if they had just left me alone, if they had just let me keep my job and some shred of dignity, none of it would have happened. But they didn't. They underestimated me. Not because I was incompetent, but because I was quiet, because I didn't play the political game, because I wasn't posting selfies from the company retreat. They assumed I'd go quietly, maybe with a sad LinkedIn post and a few awkward emails to former coworkers. They assumed wrong. By the time I walked out of the building on my last day, my badge deactivated and my Slack profile already grayed out. They had no idea what I had left behind. They thought they'd won. They thought the system would keep running, that the machine would keep humming, that my exit was just another HR footnote. But there was something they didn't know, and 3 weeks later, they'd find out. 3 weeks after my exit, I had finally started to sleep through the night again. The silence of my phone was no longer a curse, but a comfort. And even though the bitterness still lingered at the back of my throat, I was slowly starting to remember what it felt like to breathe without a deadline pressing on my chest. I had reorganized the garage, taken Sarah out for dinner twice, without checking emails between appetizers and dessert, and I was starting to entertain the idea of freelancing, maybe even consulting, but only for people who didn't treat loyalty like a disposable coffee cup. Still, something in me remained restless, not from regret, but from anticipation, because I knew, without a doubt, that Syntrex was going to call me, and when they did, I would answer, not with anger or pettiness, but with leverage. It happened on a Wednesday night, somewhere between grilled chicken and reruns of a crime show I wasn't really watching. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, and for a moment I almost didn't pick it up. But then I saw the name, Mark Chen, the CEO, not one of his assistants, not a new hire, the man himself. That alone told me more than he intended. I let it ring twice before answering, not because I was playing games, but because I wanted him to hear that I wasn't rushing, that I wasn't desperate, that my time, from now on, would be on my terms. "Hey, this is Mark," he said, the voice smooth but anxious, like someone trying to hide a leak in the roof while it's already raining inside. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I told him I was just sitting down to dinner, which was technically true, even if the food was already cold. There was a beat of silence on his end, followed by the words I had been expecting, not because I'm a prophet, but because corporate systems are as predictable as gravity. "We seem to be having an issue with the architecture from the Q2 rollout," he began, carefully avoiding anything that might sound like an admission of fault. "The backend is throwing errors that Darren and his team haven't been able to resolve. It's affecting access. Client portals are down. We believe it might be related to some of the legacy code you implemented." I didn't laugh. I didn't even smile. I just listened. Let him twist the knife a little deeper. Let him try to explain away 3 weeks of avoidable failure with a sentence that meant, "We need you, and no one else can fix it." I asked if this was an official request for assistance or just a courtesy call. The line went quiet for a moment, then Mark cleared his throat. We're hoping you might consider consulting with us, short term, just to help us get back on track. Of course, we'd compensate you fairly for your time. That word, fairly, always makes me cautious. Fair is whatever someone says it is right before they offer you half of what you're worth and expect you to smile about it. I told him I'd consider it, but I'd need details. He hesitated. Look, to be honest with you, we've already had 3 client escalations in the last 24 hours. If we can't restore access to the reporting dashboards by Friday, there's a chance we could face serious compliance issues. This isn't just a tech hiccup. It's critical. And there it was, the real reason for the call. The code wasn't just broken, the money was in danger. And when money's in danger, people remember who actually kept the lights on. I didn't give him an answer that night. I told him I'd sleep on it, which was only half true. What I actually did was draft a list, not a proposal, not a rate sheet. A list. 6 items, each one designed not just to compensate me for my time, but to reclaim the dignity they had stripped away on my last day. I didn't want revenge for the sake of revenge. I wanted correction. I wanted a course adjustment so thorough and deliberate, they would never again think of tossing out the people who actually built the foundation they stood on. The list was simple. 1. A 6-month consulting retainer paid up front, non-refundable. 2. A retroactive performance bonus equal to what I would have received had I been employed during the Q2 crisis. 3. Full authorship credit on all documentation related to the back-end system I developed, including the white paper they quietly published under Darren's name. 4. A written acknowledgement of my contribution, signed by Mark himself, to be circulated to the company as part of the transition announcement. 5. Reactivation of my system credentials without restriction for the duration of my engagement. And 6. A clause in the consulting agreement that no changes could be made to the architecture without my written approval for the next 90 days. I emailed it to Mark that night. The next morning he replied with a single sentence, "Let me run this by legal." I knew what that meant. It meant panic. It meant they didn't expect me to come prepared. It meant he thought I'd jump at the first check they waved in front of me. I didn't. I waited, patiently. Each hour that passed cost them something: client trust, revenue, reputation. And I waited with the same quiet certainty I had the night I encrypted the dependency layer they were now locked out of. By Thursday afternoon, Mark called again. His voice was different, less CEO, more survival mode. "We can agree to the terms," he said. "No preamble this time, no fake cheer. Just tell me how fast you can fix it." I told him I'd get started once the contract was signed and funds were wired. He didn't argue. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but this wasn't revenge. This was a reminder. A reminder that some things can't be replaced by younger hires or newer software or buzzwords thrown around by men in vests. Some things are earned. Some things are built. And when you build something with your own hands, you don't just walk away quietly while someone else signs the patent. That night, I dusted off my server, booted up my environment, and smiled. They thought I was gone. But the ghost in the server had just logged back in. There was something strangely cathartic about logging back into the system I had built, like slipping into a familiar jacket after years of wearing someone else's ill-fitting uniform. Everything was right where I left it. The directories named exactly how I preferred, the internal logic structured with my own personal brand of stubborn clarity, and the buried dependency triggers I had left sitting dormant like little landmines only I could locate, diffuse, or, if necessary, detonate. The architecture hadn't changed a bit since my exit, which was both expected and revealing, because despite the buzzword-heavy presentations Darren had flaunted around the office after I left, it was painfully clear that no one had dared touch the core framework. The younger engineers had likely poked around the surface, maybe even attempted a few harmless patches, But the deeper parts, the parts that mattered, were still mine entirely. When the wire transfer hit my account, followed by a digital signature, confirming the consulting agreement, I began the recovery process, not with haste or emotion, but with the cold, meticulous focus of a man who knows exactly what is broken and why it failed. The first thing I did was reverse the authentication loop that had locked out the client dashboards. It was a simple recursive trap, hidden inside a batch script, triggered only after a very specific number of request calls with the exact same session token, a situation that would never occur in a normal environment, unless someone was stress testing or trying to replicate behavior without fully understanding the routing logic. It had taken exactly 21 days to break, which aligned almost perfectly with the calendar gap between my departure and their first sign of panic. After that, I moved on to the data compression failure in the analytics pipeline, which had been the final straw for their biggest government client, causing several reports to be delayed and a potential compliance audit to be triggered. The error wasn't critical, not in the sense that it would destroy anything, but it created just enough confusion to make the system feel unstable, just enough missing pieces to make upper management sweat. I fixed that in under 3 hours, not because I was showing off, but because it was easy. I had written the module from scratch, and no one had touched it since version 2.1. They had depended on it blindly, like renters assuming the plumbing would work forever just because the water was running when they signed the lease. Throughout the process, I received 4 separate messages from Scott Levin, each more awkward than the last. The first was a brief thank you, obviously forced and likely suggested by HR. The second was a question about a deprecated integration library that had mysteriously stopped syncing with their external partner platform. The third was an invitation to touch base sometime about future opportunities, a message so tone-deaf I nearly choked on my coffee. The fourth, which I received at 2 in the morning, clearly sent after too many drinks or too much stress, was a one-liner. "You got us good, didn't you?" I didn't respond to any of them. Not out of pettiness, but because some silences say more than any reply ever could. After I restored full functionality and confirmed stability across all critical systems, I submitted my final report, detailed, professional, and deliberately absent of commentary. I did not mention the sabotage, did not reference the dependencies I had locked down, did not gloat or remind anyone what I had warned about during the realignment meetings months before they showed me the door. I simply handed them the keys to the house I had repaired and walked away without looking back. That was the agreement after all. That was the price. They wanted the system back, and I gave it to them. But the trust, the loyalty, the sense of belonging I had once brought to that company, that stayed with me. They could never afford to buy that back. In the weeks that followed, the announcement went out internally. A stiff, over-sanitized company-wide email thanking me for my exceptional service during a critical transitional phase, with a fake signature from Mark and a paragraph clearly written by someone from legal. I read it once, shook my head, and deleted it. What struck me wasn't the hollowness of the message, but the way people responded to it. Private emails, texts, a few calls from colleagues who remembered what really happened. They knew. They always knew. Some had stayed silent out of fear. Some had tried to warn me. A few, bless them, had simply kept their heads down and hoped it wouldn't happen to them next. But the real end, the actual moment of closure, came unexpectedly on a quiet Saturday morning when Sarah and I were having coffee on the porch. She asked me if I felt like I had won. I thought about it, really thought about it, and then I told her the truth. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about making sure they remembered who had built the thing they were still standing on. It was about drawing a line in the sand and saying, "You don't get to burn people like me and walk away with clean hands. You don't get to erase a man's work and expect him to bless the replacement." And yet, despite everything, the betrayal, the humiliation, the sleepless nights filled with questions I had no answers to, I didn't hate them. Not really. What I felt was something closer to pity. because a company that treats its builders like placeholders will always need someone to fix what they break. And the ones who know how to fix it, they never forget how it was broken in the first place. I never heard from Darren again, which was for the best. Last I checked, he had moved on to another innovative transformation initiative at a different firm, probably saying the same things, making the same mistakes, and preparing to fail in the same spectacular way. And as for Mark and Scott, they'd likely survive too, insulated by stock options and boardroom apologies. But they'd never again feel as safe as they did before they met the limits of their own arrogance. As for me, I took a breath, closed my laptop, and decided I was done with saving people who didn't know they needed saving. The system was running, the fire was out, and the ghost in the server had finally decided to rest. At least for now, because some lessons stick, and sometimes the only way to teach them is to let the silence do the talking.